Welcome to the lecture for Research Methods. Dr. Sam Fiala, and this will be talking about largely information from Chapter 2 of the APA manual, which is about the content and structure of research manuscripts. Before I get into that, I just want to talk briefly about a question a lot of people ask, which is, why are there so many rules? Like, why are there these certain sections that need to be in a certain order and have to be written a certain way? Well, there are a couple reasons. The primary reason is that having this style guide that everybody uses, so we all follow the same rules, really facilitates communication across fields. From all different people that would be interested in these questions that we're writing about. From social psych to behavioral neuroscientists to therapists to people that aren't even involved in social sciences at all. If we're all writing the same way, then we've got kind of a common language. And related to that, it doesn't matter how brilliant your ideas are or how important your research findings are. If you can't effectively express yourself, none of it's going to matter because nobody's going to pay attention to what you're writing. So one of the things that the APA style guide does is it helps increase the likelihood that you will express yourself in a way that is understandable to a large group of people. Right? It gets away from our kind of idiosyncratic communication where maybe you write the way that you talk with a certain group of people, like your friends or your family, or even in a certain area of research. Researchers all kind of start using the same kind of jargon and the same shorthand type language, right? And certain acronyms in the military, they're very good about that, and other people outside of that group have no idea what they're talking about. And so that's why we have these common rules. When you're writing in this area, when you're writing about research, follow these rules. That way everybody makes it more likely that they'll be able to understand what you're talking about. Another reason, it allows for increases the usability of certain statistical techniques like meta-analysis to more easily combine and compare the results of different studies, right? Because it's and meta-analytic techniques have really come on strong in the past, 10, 20 years. And their way of taking a whole bunch of studies that looked at the same question or parts of the same question and mathematically squishing them together. And if people are writing articles using a common language, it's much easier to mathematically squish stuff together, right? And then last, because our science is one that is really about building on previous knowledge, using a common language helps ensure that people can understand how a study was conducted, and that's important because of the need for replicability of study. Right? Replication is one of the key features of our science, and so if somebody has to be able to do your study again, you have to write about it in a way that they know where to look for certain parts. Like if they want to look, well, how many people do they have in the study? How many men? How many women? If you follow APA style, they know right where to skip to in your paper to find that information, and they know that it'll be there because it's required to be there, right? Okay, let's talk about a typical manuscript, and I'll talk about two things here. One, we'll be talking about a research manuscript for a finished product, right? So you've conducted a study and now you're writing it up for publication or for a thesis or dissertation, and then the other will be for a research proposal, which is what we'll be writing. And a lot of it is there's overlap. It's the same thing, and whenever there are differences, I'll point those out. So we start off with some of the same stuff. You have a title page, obviously. And a couple things on the title page. Obviously, you'll have a title, which will be upper and lowercase, and you want it basically to identify the variables that you studied, if you've already done it, or that you're going to study, if it's a proposal, and the relationship between those variables. The effects of A on B. Or if you're not doing a experiment, if you're doing a correlational study, you say the relationship between, or the association of, or risk of, whatever. But you try to be concise, and you leave out words like a study of. Of course, it's a study. We know you're writing about a study. You don't have to say it's a study of the relationship between. Just cut to the chase. What are the variables? What's the relationship between them? And speaking of that, to keep it concise, you're limited to no more than 12 words. Just basic style stuff. It's centered horizontally, and it used to be it was centered vertically, but more recent manuals have moved it into the upper half of the page. It's nice if your title is kind of catchy, sexy, but not necessary. It's just nice if you can make something cool, but you don't have to make it cool as long as it clearly communicates what the study is about and doesn't mislead the reader. Below the title will be the author's name, first name, middle initial if you have one, and last name. And they ask for the middle initial because it helps differentiate. If there's more than one Jeffrey Kahn, well, we know this one is Jeffrey H. Kahn. If there's more than one Jeffrey H. Kahn, well, then one of them has a problem. And then below that, your institution affiliation, which for us would be Texas A&M University Central Texas. When you're submitting for publication, it's pretty common to include on the title page an author note where you repeat your name and affiliation and where correspondence could be sent, and then some other things too. If if your research is being sponsored by a drug company, you put that in here. But typically, author notes aren't required for theses or dissertations, and so I won't require it on papers in my class either. It's mostly kind of a copyright issue thing. The other thing on the title page, so at the top we have the running head and page number, which you put the running head and page number both in a header, right? You go to Word and insert header and put them there. And on the title page you have the words running head, where just the R is capitalized and then a colon, space, and then your running head is in all caps after that. And the running head itself should be an abbreviation of your title, not the first couple of words of your title. Used to be, not anymore, but an abbreviated title, no more than 50 characters. That includes letters, punctuations, and spaces. So you'll insert a header, you'll type that, and then in Word you can insert the page number. Click on the little pound sign, little number sign, and it'll put that page number in there for you automatically, so you don't have to redo it every page. But then on subsequent pages after the title page, you won't have the words running head anymore. You'll just have the actual running head. And to do that, you'll have to have different headers for the first page and subsequent pages. And to do that, you've got to know how to work with Word a little bit. You basically have to insert a section break and then disconnect those sections. I won't go into detail how to do that here because there's plenty of instructions online for it. Just Google change header in Word, and you can pick whichever article you want to read that tells you how to do that. Because otherwise, the words running head will show up on every page, and it can take a little while to figure out how to do it. But once you do, it's a good skill to have. Okay, so that's it for your title page. Scroll on down, and then the next page will be your abstract, which you probably won't write your abstract until you've written the whole rest of the paper, because the abstract is basically a summary of your paper. Right? So of course we see the running head at the top, page number, and then abstract centered in the middle. According to the APA style rules, it should be bolded. This sample paper from the APA, it's not bolded, but it certainly should be, so that's an error on their part. But you note that it's not, once you go into the abstract, it's not indented, it's in block format, right? Unlike the rest of the paper, which you typically indent paragraphs. And basically, it's a brief summary of either your article, if it's a finished product, or a brief summary of a proposal. So it should include, the problem under study, how many participants, and key features, which are age, sex, and ethnicity, essential features of the method, and then if it's a finished product, you report your basic findings, kind of the key findings, your results. If it's a proposal, then in your abstract you indicate your planned analyses, and then again for a finished product, you would have one or two sentences in there about the conclusions you draw from the results and what the implications are, possibly putting in something about limitations, but typically not. More focused on implications. For proposal, you probably throw in one sentence about potential implications. If you found what you were looking for, what should people do differently? How would it affect the theory? That kind of thing. Word limits for the abstract. There's not an APA rule for it per se that I would recommend you stick to, because an APA, I think they have one, but I wouldn't worry about theirs. It depends on the journal you're looking at. I would say shoot for about 200, no more than 200 words. Okay, and the abstract is on its own page. So at the end of the abstract, you hit You insert a page break. Don't space down, because when you do that, if you add stuff to your abstract, your title page later, it just screw up your spacing. So always, whenever you have a page break between sections, insert the page break. Right. So insert page break, and you start writing your paper. And your paper begins, really, you have your title page, abstract, and begins with the introduction section. And the introduction section, unlike other sections, doesn't have a heading, right? Like the method section, the results all have those one-word headings. The heading for the intro is the title of your paper, whatever your title is going to be. So the title of this paper is Sample A Paper for Students Interested in Learning APA Style. And even though it is kind of like a heading, it doesn't follow the rules for headings, so it's not bolded, kind of weird, but it's centered just at the beginning of your introduction, and you don't have to repeat it on every page after that. And then you write a couple of pages of your introduction. Your introduction has just a couple things you need to accomplish in the intro. One, establish the importance of your research question. So why is it important to ask this question? Why is it important to find an answer? Review what investigations have already attempted to answer the question you're looking at, kind of your general topic. And then related to that, you need to identify the gap that your study fills. So people looked at this question here, here, and here, but nobody's looked at it with this group, or nobody's looked at it measuring the variable this way, or just this part of the question has never occurred to anybody to be studied, and that's where my study comes in. Right? So you have to identify that gap. And then from that, you identify your hypothesis. So here's the gap. Here's what needs to be looked at. Here's what I think will happen. And then you have to explain the rationale for what you think is going to happen. Right? Explain the rationale for your hypothesis, which usually involves drawing connections to previous research and current theory. Right? And you've got to get all that done in your intro. And that's usually the most interesting part of the paper to write, where you're going to be summarizing, integrating research findings with your own logic. And then we get down to the next section, which will be method, and you notice there's not a page break here. You just it's continuously flows from the previous section. And our levels of heading in APA, centered, bolded for the primary or the first level, which this is the first level of this section. If there's subsections in the method, we'll see how that looks different in a minute. But in the method, overall, you want to have sufficient detail of all the subsections of the method for somebody to be able to come back and do your study again. Now, the intro is the same for a proposal and a finished product. Same exact thing. So if you once you write your intro for your proposal, if you conduct the study, you've already got that part of the paper written. Hey, that's most of it. Now the method would be a little different. Not much, really. It's still they're almost identical. The key difference here is verb tense. It's that simple. For when you've already done a study, you write about what you did. There were this many participants, right? They completed questionnaires, right? Versus a proposal, there will be 50 participants. They will be asked to complete questionnaires. So it's just a future tense in proposal and past tense in a completed project. And that's the primary difference. So again, once you've written this section for proposal, if you ever do the study, go back and change your verbs, and it's done. Unless, of course, you changed anything from what you planned to do and what you actually did. The goals of the method section, you want to describe what you did, if it's a finished product, or what you will do, in enough detail that it can be done by someone else. Right? And you need to be able to distinguish between essential and non-essential details. And this is something that partly is common sense, partly comes with experience. For example, if you're doing a drug study, obviously you need to identify exactly what type of drug and the dose. Right? And probably if it came in capsule form or injected, right? Because they may act differently. But you don't need to identify, if it came in pill form, you don't need to identify what color the cup was that the pill was placed in. Right? That's a non-essential detail. So you want enough detail, but you don't want these non-essential minutiae that are going to be distracting. Okay. So you want to identify what you did or what you will do. And then the other goal in the method is to, as you're doing that, convince the reader that you're making the right choices. So you're kind of explaining why some choices are being made. Participants will be randomly assigned to conditions to promote internal validity, right? Or whatever you're doing. A lot of times you can relate it to either internal validity or external validity, but you are providing a rationale for your choices. Why this is how I'm going to do it, and this is why. This is why it needs to be done this way. To prevent experimenter bias, to prevent bias on the part of the participants. Whatever your reason for a choice, you can put that in there as well as you're writing about what you're doing. Okay. This sample paper has kind of a paragraph at the beginning of the method. You won't typically have that. Typically, it'll start with the first subsection, which will be the participant subsection. So now it's no longer centered. Now it's all the way over to the left, bolded, and then you hit return to start your paragraph. And in the participant section, you're basically just going to say who's going to be in the study and how you will get them. And if it's a completed study, who was in your study and how you got them. How did you recruit subjects, and what are they like? Their kind of key characteristics. Research design will be the next subsection. Sometimes you'll see it written design. Let's say research design, it's a bit redundant. And this is where you identify your variables. And if it's an experimental study, whether the independent variables will be between subjects or within subjects, or if you're using a repeated measures design. And we'll talk more about that later, different types of designs. And then the next subsection, here it's titled measures. It'll have different, sometimes you'll see it measures, sometimes you'll see it materials, sometimes materials and apparatus or apparati. Depends on what you have. If all you're doing is giving people paper and pencil measures, so all you're doing is measuring things, then it'll probably be called the measure section. If you're exposing them to some stimuli, you may have a measures and materials section, or you may break it apart into two subsections: a material subsection and a measures subsection. Right? If you're showing people, pictures of photos, and then having them rate them for how much they like them, you're probably going to have a material section and describe what the photos look like, how big they are, where you got them, with enough information that somebody else could come back and do that same study again. And we'll talk in more detail later about exactly what needs to go in these subsections. Okay, so after the measures and materials, we go to the procedure, which is just identifying everything that will happen to participants from beginning to end. Or if it's a completed study, everything that happened to participants from beginning to end. Again, at an appropriate level of detail, which is usually the hard part to figure out how much detail is needed. Okay. So now we get down to results, and here's where we start to see some more divergence between a completed manuscript and a proposal. Obviously, in a completed manuscript, you will have results. You will have data that you can talk about, and that's where you talk about it. In proposal, you don't have that yet. So, in a finished project, you'll identify the tests you used and what you found, right? And you'll talk about statistical significance, usually, and effect sizes, especially nowadays, and possibly also confidence intervals. And you're going to relate these findings to your hypotheses, right? So consistent with expectations, children who played the competitive video game struck the bobo doll more frequently, mean equals 9, than did children who played the cooperative video game, mean equals 5. T, whatever your degrees freedom are, equals 3.7, P less than 0.01. Right? And you have that whole statistical statement in there, and that goes in your results section. And so in a finished study, that's what you're doing. You're just saying the results of your tests, both the ones that were statistically significant and the ones that weren't. So all the tests you ran, you talk about. In a proposal, a little different. So now you're going to, since you don't have data yet, you'll probably won't even call it a result section. We'll call it the data analysis section. Right? And in this section, you'll identify what statistical tests you would use to analyze your data. Right, so you might have a sentence in there like, an independent group's t-test will be conducted to determine if children playing the competitive video game strike the bobo doll more often on average than children who play the cooperative video game. Alpha equals 0.05. Right, so, and notice the difference there. When you talk about results, I found this thing, it's p equals whatever. When you're talking about what you're proposing to do, it's alpha, because you set alpha a certain limit, and then when you have results, your statistical package generates some p-value, which is a probability. Right? So you want to say what test you're going to use, but then you also want to identify your expected pattern of results using resulty type language. You don't have to make up numbers here. I don't want you to make up t-tests or ANOVA numbers, but you say something like, it's expected that there will be a statistically significant difference in the mean number of times a child strikes the bubble doll between the group of children who play competitive video games and the group of children who play cooperative video games. So identify, so expected these will be different, and expected there will be no difference between these two groups, right? Or these variables would be positively correlated, right? That's results language, and these will be negatively correlated. It will have not have a statistically significant correlation. So what do you expect to find using results type language, but not necessarily numbers? Okay, and then we go down to the discussion section, which again, in a finished manuscript, you're going to do a couple things. You're going to restate your findings in plain English and kind of explain it to grandma while relating them to your hypotheses. So, kids who played the competitive video game displayed more aggression than blah, blah. So here, instead of saying hit the bubble doll more times, I'm saying displayed more aggression. So I'm moving from the specific measurement level, the numbers level, exactly what I looked at, which is what I talk about in the results, to more of a construct concept level. That's where I go in the discussion. So what do what construct was hitting the bubble doll measuring? It was measuring aggression or violence, however I identified it earlier in the paper. Right? So you're abstracting a bit in the discussion section. And then you're going to relate your findings to previous research and theory, and then draw conclusions about what the pattern of results means in the context of previous research and theory. Once you've done that, you discuss potential limitations to the conclusions that you drew. So we concluded this. However, we might be wrong because of this, this, and this. And then usually you address why you're not wrong. And then you want to discuss potential implications of your findings. Given what we found, parents should start doing this, or teachers start doing this, or this theory needs to be revised, whatever it is. And the last thing you typically see and typically do would be to identify the next step in research. Future research should address the question of blah, 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 or should repeat this study again with this other group, or measuring it this other way. However you're going to do it. Now, for a proposal, a little different, right? Because you don't have results to talk about. So what you're going to do is kind of the second half of all that other stuff. You identify aspects of the proposed methodology that might limit the validity. Think about internal, external validity. Might limit the validity of conclusions you would draw. And there's two ways you can do it. You can say, okay, if my hypothesis is supported, and I conclude that A caused B, I might be wrong because yada yada yada. And you can also talk about, however, if the hypothesis is not supported and we find that we didn't find support that A caused B, might be wrong there too. A might really cause B, but we failed to find it because yada yada yada. Right? So you can discuss both sides of the coin there, because you don't have you haven't flipped the coin yet. You don't have results. So you can talk about if you found stuff, why might you be wrong, and if you didn't find stuff, why might you be wrong. Same thing with the implications. If your hypothesis is supported, what would the implications be? If your hypothesis was not supported, and if you found that smoking doesn't cause cancer, what should people do differently? Smoke away. And then last, you would identify the next step in research. And here you might also be thinking about, okay, if you found support, okay, now what needs to be done? Or if you failed to find support, what would need to be done next? And that's if you were doing a proposal instead of the had a finished product. Okay, and that's the meat of the paper. Then you just have a few more details, right? We come down. So now, until now, we haven't hit a page break again, right? From the intro to the discussion is all continually flowing, right? As long as we don't have, like the word method at the bottom of the page and no sentences below it. Then you're going to scoot that method down. Otherwise, it's all flowing until you get down to the references page, your works cited page, right? Now you're going to hit page break again. It's going to begin on a new page. And again, this sample paper doesn't follow the rules of APA. Since this is the header, it should be in bold. References should be in bold. You still have your running head, still have your page number. And then you have all the references that you cited in your text in alphabetical order. And everything that you cited in your text should be here, and nothing that's here, there should be nothing here that's not cited in your text. So if you read some stuff and you found it interesting, but you didn't cite it in your paper, you don't put it in your references. It's not like in some classes where you have a bibliography where everything you read goes there. No, it's only stuff that you cited. Okay. And then there's a variety of other things you could have after that. It shows some things. If you have any tables, which you probably won't. Typically, that's related to results section. They'll come after that. Figures and figure caption pages. If you have any appendices, if you make your own measure up, typically you would include that measure in an appendix so that people could use, so they could do the study again. So it's something you made up. Yeah. And that's about it. Pretty straightforward. And again, as we go through, as we're working on each of these sections, we'll talk more specifically about what goes in them. But I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what to expect, what we're going to be working toward in writing a research proposal. Okay. That's all for now. Take care.